Hello and welcome to Dell's Gaming. I'm Dell and this is Kerbal Space Program, where we're looking at the station above the Mun, orbiting quite nicely on our inclined orbit. Now there's been a few changes, maybe subtle, difficult to see in some cases, obviously if you're not used to the Kerbal and the series, but after our additions of the modules for the remote tech and the station supplies requirement, I needed to set up a lot of satellites, which I did in the last episode, and plus around the Mun, so that we had control, and then also send up some new supplies on a tanker and get our Kerbals fed so they'll actually do some work and operational again. So although this looks similar, this tanker is a new one. It's got the new solar panels. It's also got the KSI unit on there, which gives us supplies and also holds mulch, which is basically Kerbal poo, basically. But that's, the poo's filling up, the supplies are not going down. But the good point is all of our people are now working and are able to work on our science. Now, one bad point at the moment is when I try to transmit science, nothing is transmitting. So and I've looked at the reports on the forums, and I think a few other people have mentioned that in the latest build, for some reason, the science labs are either not working or it's a combination of that and possibly remote tech or one of the other little items, which is causing a few little issues. I also brought up the lander with a few people which were required for one of our missions, Tresella here, which we'll go through in a minute, that was pulled on a mission here. But the other bit I've been trying to work on is trying to optimise the takeoff from the Kerbin to get our vessel up into orbit, because we have to spend a lot of fuel and resources just to get something like one of these tankers up into orbit and around the Mun. Well, at the moment it's about a 13:1 ratio I got it down to, but we'll go through that next actually, just to show you what I did using the flight control system. So let's just have a look at some of the items and some of the launches that I went through to bring us up into this situation, or this current situation. So this is our 421,000 kilo launcher for the refueling pod on the launch pad, and I've used the flight controller to set a 5-degree pitch over almost as soon as we cleared the launcher, and just rolled it around so that it's at 0, so that when we get rid of the solid boosters they move off to the side. We also then at 5,000 set the pitch over at 10 degrees, and this is to get a relatively smooth but controlled turn. We then put it over to a 20 degree at 10,000, and then when it comes up to 20 I'll be using about 40 degree turn. Now it's the numbers are those number of degrees away from 90 degrees, which is straight up. I know it's a little awkward. 0 is the horizon basically. So as we came up to 40 we should go to a 60 degree to a horizontal flight path or launch path to minimise the amount of fuel that was required. Now we carried on going up, and I tried to get our apoapsis so it's about at the point where we need to do a Mun intercept. So I carry on reducing down the level until I got something which was about right to do a Mun intercept. So we've gone straight from the launch pad onto a Mun intercept rather than having to go into an orbit first. So at this time we're already at about 80,000 feet and we're down to 84,000 kilos. So we've used about 340,000 kilos of fuel and other parts just to get us into this point here, a sort of semi-orbit. Not even orbital actually. At the moment we're just trying to do an intercept. So it shows how much equipment and fuel you need just to get out of the atmosphere. So I set the flight computer to run the new maneuver node. Had a little bit more of a jiggle around with it just to get it so it's as close as I can to the space station's current orbit as well. So we've got less mucking around to do when we actually get to the Mun. And then I let the flight computer run that last little burn. And after doing an intercept burn around the Mun, we are close to the space station with a current weight, roughly in the range of 32,000 kilos. So that's only 7% of what we started with. So I had a bit of a muck around trying to get the system to dock using the flight computer, but to be honest I found it a little inaccurate. I wouldn't say inaccurate, it was a little bit awkward to try and get it to get accurately in position. It always wanted to aim at the target, which is fine when you're trying to intercept initially, but now that I want to bring us level onto the docking port, I found it not quite what I would like. So eventually I did disable it and just turn on standard SAS and just use the standard manual, bring it in, and just slowly use the RCS to bring this quite large tanker in place. You can see it's got the our solar panels out as well, and it's got the food. So this is a load of food for the Kerbals, so that these guys on the space station are really hungry now. They've been sitting there doing nothing, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for this food and fuel to be delivered. Now, I didn't get it first time. Did take a little adjustment there just to get back and have a second go at it as such, but it might have even been a third go. But when you get it wrong, I'd forgotten to set my RCS to be a little bit finer control, and I went in there a little heavy handed as such, but that's all part of docking. It is a slow process of little increments. If you try and rush it, you will basically crash, and that can be all very bad to you in the end. Now, I did get there in the end. It was a bit of a rough landing at an angle, not as nice as I would like, but I just let the system settle itself out, turned off all the SAS, and just let it pull itself into position on that, and got there eventually. Once docked up, I was able to transfer what was needed, the various fuels, and able to look at what the fuel situation was with the people. Now, it does show 1 year and 408 days worth of supplies, so be aware that 1 year in Kerbal is actually 426 days, not 365. So minor thing, but just one of those little items that confused me at first as to why it was 408 days, but now it makes sense. Next was to get some new Kerbals up to the station, including Ted Gunn, our taxi driver, and Tracella, which was one of the missions to land on the Mun. So we got our reliable taxi, doing again using the flight computer to do the incremented takeoff. So, this particular one, we started at 320,000 kilos at takeoff. And we didn't start in exactly the right place to be able to do a single orbit into Mun intercept. So I had to go into an orbital trajectory on this to just bring us around into an orbit so that we could then go for an intercept for the Mun. I'm going to try and do another one, see if it's any different to try and do an intercept directly onto the Mun. It's all part of trying to minimise the amount of weight I need, or in some ways is maximise the weight taken to the Mun. So Ted did his taxi driver job, giving them some talk about the areas. Now this has got a bit of flex in this particular ship. I've got to fix that, I think, before I use it again. It's okay, it's not dangerous, but it is a bit of a flex. It almost lost it near the end there. That was a little bit off as such, but managed to separate it quite nicely. And you know, at this orbital point we're down to about 55,000 tons, which is still shows how much is required. We did a quick little EVA just for another little bit of requirement for a contract, and then we come into the Mun. So our ship got to the Mun and we did a good intercept. But once we'd worked out the intercept for this, it was going to take quite some time. So we put an alarm on that for about the next 3 days. So it was about a 4-day marker on that to get a good intercept. So I decided to try and bring up another tanker. This is a slightly smaller one than the first one. Again, using that new FlightComputer just to get a nice and smooth orbital sort of curve, and using the roll as well, so that when we separate the various stages they don't crash into the ship too much, or that is the hope anyway. So we managed to get that up. Went into an orbital again. I should have tried for a single stage once more, but I hadn't really practiced with this ship, so I'm going to do that next time. We got the radio antennas out before we lost contact. That's always very important on these unmanned missions. And then let the system just do a nice burn to get us into a nice orbit. You can see there's a little bit of flex there, not as bad as the taxi, but you can see it's the constant readjusting of the item of the jets on the rear. So once we did our burn, we managed to intercept the Mun, and we did our final intercept burn to try and get into a reasonable capture of an intercept of the station. Once I'd done a little bit jiggling around with that, which takes a little while, it was actually looking at something like about 7 days before a good intercept. Now I could have speeded it up, but slow and steady, it's okay, take a bit of time, get a nice close intercept. So that means that I started to fast forward that, and just to try and we just did a little bit final jiggling around just to see if I could get it any better, but it was sitting around the 7-day mark. So just create an alarm, and then I just fast forwarded everything until that point. So we jumped to the taxi because that was due a lot quicker than the tanker. So we've got 2 ships flying at the same time. I'm trying to jiggle around and go between here, and we're coming in to the station here with our taxi. It's only about 1k away. Just letting Ted control this. We didn't use the FlightComputer too much on this one here. This was more of a slightly more manual approach, common to everything, using the main jets first, just to try and get into a good docking position to bring us in reasonably tight to the station. And we did get in quite nicely, and just bring it in with the RCS. Which was relatively straight. It was a better, I think, a slightly better than I had done with the original large tanker. It's a slightly smaller, so it's easier to move around and just get that reaction from the RCS to bring it in a little smoother. although it's relatively Kerbal smooth. I think this landing was. It wasn't quite a certainly wasn't what I class as a Jingles landing. This was a a Dell smoother than normal. It could be worse, could be better. A lot of jiggling around just to get that level and keep it level. But we came in with a lot of fuel spare, so it's actually ended up bringing a lot of spare fuel with it, which is a good point for this. So we come in a little heavy. You can see there was a bit of a bounce there, but it came in quite nicely. So once our passengers were on board, it was time to start planning for the landing position on the Mun we had to go to. So the first stage was to get the wait until the space station was over, or roughly just about to come over the landing point. We could then separate off the lander from the main station. So we were now, Ted was once again taxiing Tresella down to the Mun here, doing his pilot job, because we needed him as a pilot on this, because there's limited probe potential on this. So we planned a nice route, said goodbye to the station, and planned a route to come close a little bit before, so we're going to get there before the station does, so that when we take off again, the idea was to try and be close to the station again. And I also planned a nice 400 Delta V burn, or millisecond burn, at the end for our landing, to try and gauge where we were going to try and land on the target. It was actually after quite a few burns, one to get us in the area. So first of all, we had to say goodbye to the station and make sure that on this burn we don't actually hit the station, because that would be quite bad. But it was fairly safe. That wasn't going to happen in this particular burn. We then did a final one just to bring us in line with the landing zone, and then lined ourselves up ready for the final burn. So this was going to be I originally planned it for 400 meters a second burn. So it was basically set on the orbital prograde, just letting Ted sort that out and keep it in line there. So I'm just doing a maximum burn to try and cut off some of the, or maximum amount of the horizontal. There is other ways of calculating this, and my calculations weren't 100% right. I need to just modify it a little bit. It was about correct, but I think it needs a little bit more the 400, but we'll see that in a bit. But yeah, just did a full burn, let Ted sort it out. Now by keeping on the prograde, once the delta V is, the horizontal speed has been reduced enough, I do change it to surface. Now you can see we're a little bit out, and that is because I didn't allow for the rotation of the Mun. So next time I do this, I've got to remember to make sure it's slightly to the right a little bit, or whichever the rotational direction is, just to allow for the rotation of the Mun during those earlier adjustment burns, shall we say, to get us into the right area. So we're nearly done now. At this point I realised that my horizontal was still pretty damn high, basically. I'm still at 200 meters a second burn, so I just continued burning and made a note that really I think that's going to have to be nearer a 600 burn, I think, in the future. Then I need that little bit more. Also, what I had, because I was doing this manually, I'd underestimated was the amount of time it would take. The estimate from the system was just way off. So I'm going to increase that in the future. Most probably back to about 600 or so, and that should get slower. Now, because we've slowed down enough, the prograde marker's moving up, which means our horizontal speed has reduced significantly, which is fine, and we're leaving Ted to keep on the prograde. So not having to manually adjust here, and just doing little burns just to stop our vertical speed getting too high. We don't want to go too low, so about 50-60 is fine. And we can just do a little burn every now and again just to keep us online. Now I did experiment with the flight computer here just to put us around, but I went back to the just letting Ted control us. It was just also working out what angle I was at to make sure which way was facing forward. So I'm just giving some little burns every now and again just to stop our vertical getting too high. Our horizontal at the same time is being reduced, so it's nice and easy to land this way, I found. And this is a using, it's not totally manual, but it is easy. Let the surface prograde marker and little burns just nullify everything at the right time. If you follow that marker, it should eventually end up at 0, 0, which is the aim, really. So I was keeping an eye on our terrain altitude rather than the main altitude at the top. So that's an advantage of having the Kerbin engineer, Kerbal engineer, because I can get an altitude above the terrain rather than relying upon the altimeter at the front, because we're in the highlands, so we're actually landing on top of somewhere which isn't at 0. We're not landing in the sea on Kerbin where you can use your altimeter accurately. So as it was coming down, just slowing down a little further, just getting that speed. I wanted to come down at about 10 meters a second, a little bit less, and a little bit of a suicide burn just at the last moment, just to nullify as much as I could of the velocity, just to be on the safe side. You don't want to hit too hard. The legs can take a fair bashing, I believe, but there's no point in risking it if I don't have to. So it's been smooth so far. Our horizontal speed is down to millimeters a second, which is fine. Final little suicide burn just to reduce it down to about 4-7 meters a second, and that's a landing. That's a landing, and yep, that was fairly economic and a better landing than I've done in a long time. The only problem is where did we land? So we're a little bit off of the actual marker, but close. But I also never saw a text. Now, distance-wise was actually about right. We weren't far off. It was just we were a bit left to right of the actual target we wanted to. So I sent Trisella out to try and do an EVA report to see if that would satisfy, because that's one of the requirements, I think, for the contract, to see if that would satisfy. But it didn't, so we had to do a little bit of a movement, shall we say, and just move over. So I tried to work out what was the angle we were at from the proper landing zone, just to get a little closer. And I thought about 60 degrees, but really I think it was a little bit less than that. But yeah, just roughly 60 I'd set myself out at, and I basically set the flight director to set us at a heading which would be suitable for that, and a slight pitch angle of 20 degrees. So we're going to head over, change to a 60 degree heading, 70 degree pitch, and I set the roll at 0 just so I knew which way was pointing forward, and so just let the flight computer hold that angle for us. Now I didn't need too much power, I didn't want to get too high on this, so I was just trying to keep an eye on the altitude and just give a little burst just to try and keep it around that 4,000 altitude mark, which is, you know, bobbing us along the surface quite nicely. heading us roughly towards the marker I was aiming at. I did go, push us up a little bit higher, about 200 meters off the surface. And I could have actually increased the angle here a little bit. That 20 degrees, I could have gone a little bit more, I think, potentially, but I left it where it was at the time. I thought slow and steady, although it wasn't as fuel efficient as it possibly could have. 45 degree would have been a little bit better, I think. At least I was only going in a little way. I didn't want to overdo this. If I'd overdone it, then I could have overshot, which I sort of did anyway, and then we'd be back to where we started. Now I did think I was a little bit out with my 60 degrees and had to change basically the heading again, just to get us a bit closer. I think I should have been closer to 70 degrees, so I had to go back a little bit. Now, one thing I never saw pop up is, you get the text that comes up that says, now entering zone ZY, XY. I've never saw that. That's why I ended up trying to move and just get as close as I can. It's possible that maybe I was entering the zone and never saw it. Now, I did have one bit, because I was in a cratered area, I was coming up on the lip of the crater. And that was getting a little, what should we say, fractious, getting near to this edge of the crater. I'm thinking, shall I go beyond the crater, land this side? Don't want to land on the edge of the crater, because it's going to be at an angle, and I'll end up tipping over, and God knows what will happen at that point. All sorts of fun and hilarity, possibly. But the Kerbals, Ted and Trisella, would not appreciate it. So, after having a bit of a think, it was time to big burn, get over this lip of the crater. And we went down to 70 meters, or actually about 70 meters before it started to take up. You can see the lights just starting to get on the lip of the crater, but yeah, I got over it. But that was close. That, if hadn't noticed that would have been a problem, should we say? So my concentration at that point was just to get off that lip, and you can see I've actually gone a little too far the opposite side now. So I'm hoping, oh crap, I need to get back onto the ground. But let's not panic. Let's not panic. Let's just get ourselves on a good angle in the opposite direction, just to kill some of that velocity. I start trying to muck around with the flight computer to do this at first. But it's sometimes easier just to put it onto, and just rather than try and recorrect, is just land where I was. I was close enough, I think. If it was going to work, it was going to work here. So killed off the flight computer, press Z, got Ted to take us down one more time. So let Ted sort it out on this surface system to kill off our horizontal and also the vertical at the same time. And he did a good job of bringing that down, if I do say so. Once again, relatively smooth using that controller. You could do it totally manual, but Ted is experienced enough, so I might as well use an experienced pilot if I can. So now landed, still no text pop up of that we've landed in the right sector, but I just send out Trisella one more time into onto an EVA once I'd had a look around and thought, that's close enough, I hope. So round at the experiments we had, everything in this area, just to get a little test, just to make sure everything was done as much as we could. Science is good. All the more science, the more items we can have later on. So Drusilla went outside to have a look at what's around there. Jumping off, I'm not good on the EVA, so she has a bit of a bad fall, but picks herself up, and at this point I'm thinking, right, have I got to head over to that area? So first of all though, let's go and collect the science from the experiments and reset them ready for next time. So might as well, the goo canister and the science junior that's on here needs to be reset. So collect it, restore it, so that way it's nice and usable. That's the advantage of having a scientist. Same with the goo, collect it and then restore it. Luckily the thermometer and the barometer is just collecting data. I didn't need to, I could even transmit those, but we're going to take them up to the station to do the science lab, get them to work on the information. So now I'm thinking, well, is this going to work? I mistakenly thought the contract hasn't zipped up, but I haven't finished the contract yet. So I'm thinking, have I got to head there? Have I got to go into that area? Oh, it was a difficult decision as to what I should needed to do at this point. Trying to have a quick little think about, can I show where we are? So I know it's heading towards the flag that I'd previously landed, where Drusilla had landed first. So I just got myself out of that position and started to roughly try and find my way towards that flag, wherever it had gone to. Because, yeah, that's the wrong way. You gotta go right a bit. Go on, turn around. Yes, you're going the wrong way, numpty. Yes, that's the way. I thought, okay, I'm going to be ages walking that way, so let's go and check. And I checked the contracts and I noticed that there's some green ticks. So I must be in the zone, even though the text hasn't popped up to tell me I'm in the zone. So that's all good. Now, let's head back and get back in the lander, because now we have to rendezvous with the science station again. So safely all back in the lander, it is time to head out onto orbit. So I used the flight computer at the first part, just to set a heading roughly towards where I think the intercept direction was with the space station, which I thought was about 155 degrees or so. Got myself up a little bit, aimed at the flight director at 45 degrees towards that direction, until I got myself up to about 19-20,000 apoapsis, which gives me enough time to do a quick orbital maneuver to try and get a rough intercept on the space station. So got roughly a burn that would get us on target to a degree. So just had, as always, had a jiggle around with it just to get it in alignment, and then got the flight computer do my burn for me, because it's more accurate than me doing it. And I'm sure Ted Gunter can just press the right buttons at the right time anyway, so you know, it's not really a big loss. So whilst fast forwarding to get our lander to intercept, our tanker alarm came up, because the tanker was now in line with the space station as well. So now it was time to try and get our tanker to land at the same time. So trying to get a maneuver node which will minimize the difference in our trajectories and bring us in line. FlightComputer did its usual thing, just gave that a quick burn to get us in line, hopefully with the space station. So got a little closer, just fast forwarded it up to that point, so we were heading towards it and managed to get nice and close to it. Took a few more little workings of the maneuver nodes just to see if I could make it a little closer and a little better intercept as such, just to try and it's sometimes difficult, I'm finding, to try and get that trying to minimize the intercept differences can sometimes be a bit awkward. But it's fun trying to work it out. That's why I do it slowly and with patience, just so that I don't overdo it at any one time, because that can be a problem. So we were about 3 kilometers away, so that wasn't too bad. Was able to just give it a little burn to head towards it. I did a lot of this more manually rather than using the FlightComputer at this point, just to try and get ourselves heading in roughly an intercept. Looking at where our direction was and where our flight direction was, just aiming slightly to the side each time, and then use the RCS. So now we're at least heading towards the station, which is a good point. But the station's moving a little bit, so I need to correct it as I go along. Trying to readjust a little bit as we go ahead, as we get a little closer. But we're online now, so that's quite good. Only 1 kilometer away, which is, now just got to do a couple more burns just to slow myself down, because we're heading quite fast towards it. And you wouldn't want to sort of like collide with it or something like that, because that would be very bad. So once again, little bits at a time, just heading towards it. Softly, softly. Again, it's one of the things I like about Kerbal. You have to be exact and you have to work it all out. I do set an alarm here, just check the alarms, and because an alarm for the lander had come up. So we've got the lander also now needed its maneuver node sorted out, so to minimize its delta V. So we've got both ships. We've got the tanker within 1 kilometer of the space station and heading towards it slowly, and I'm now quickly trying to get the lander to come up with a reasonable intercept before it flies off too far, so that we'll be able to get that landed as well. And we ended up with something which is around about 6 minutes, 7 minutes time as far as our intercept goes. So yeah, we've got 6 minutes now to go back to the tanker and land it, so that I can then take over the lander. So okay, we'll continue where we left off, head us back towards the station. So you know, we're down, as I say, we've got about 5 minutes I think at this time before we need to get into the lander. So I'm trying to find the docking port to connect to and set as our docking target at this point, but thinking, okay, well, let's just get a little closer, to it, just heading, and we're heading quite nicely towards it. Just speed up a little bit and get there a little closer, I think. So use the RCS just to give it a little bit of forward velocity. But I need to just change our angle a little bit, I think, just so that we're aiming at the right point. And I seem to have no control. What's going on? And yeah, remote tech, we're not in range of anything to give us a signal, so our tanker is now aimlessly heading towards the station, totally out of control. So this was a bit of a butt clench moment. It's like, oh shit, oh crap, oh dear, what can I do? We are heading, luckily we headed slightly south of it, and then we got remote tech back again. So it was only about 30 seconds out, but with no pilot, that could have been worse, a lot worse. So now we've wasted a bit of time because of that, so we've still got a little bit of time left just to now dock again. And I'm also hoping now that I don't lose signal again, because that could be bad, as you can imagine. Definitely not good. So trying to get this in a little bit. I was a little bit possibly rushing it now, thinking, oh crikey, what if I lose connection again when I'm at this range? That would be very bad. So I did muck it up a little bit at the beginning and have to readjust a little bit on there. But got in there, and then it was time to go back to the lander and bring us back in. So the lander just had that little burn it needed just to get us in. A lot of this is docking, a lot of this video, but you know, to me it's interesting. It's not easy to dock these ships, especially when you're within a couple of minutes of each other. When you've got multiple ships coming in to dock at the same time, and you're hoping that, you know, and the remote tech adds that little extra level of unknown to your adventure in knowing whether, you know, if something is going whether it is going to dock or not, whether you're suddenly going to lose contact with your ship at a crucial moment. But we came in nicely. This is now, because this is controlled, I've got local control. So basically Ted Gunn is basically driving this. I'm just pressing the buttons at the right time. It's not using autopilot, but it's as close as you can get. Certainly don't have to worry about radio communications, which is of great benefit. So had to work out which docking port I have available. Only got one available now. So just went to the other side and then started burning. Did this all manually, just trying to get our flight direction in line with the space station's flight direction, and pull us in and get us into a dock. Because, you know, Ted's given Tracy lots of tales about all of the bad landings he had, obviously filling her with lots of confidence about the particular trips. Also talking about everything under the sun, as taxi drivers do, everything you're not really interested in, when Tracy's Tricella's just thinking, just get me back alive, just get me there alive, please. You know, Ted Gunn's trying his best, you know, trying to do the old pickup lines. I don't know what Kerbal pickup lines are like, but you know, he's definitely balls out, but still pants on because he's wearing an astronaut suit. I'm sure he's plenty of talk about football, the weather, although there's no weather up here. Driving one-handed, because, you know, he's confident like that. but comes back, not a bad landing. They're safely docked on there. That was a nice tight docking. Whoops, just a little out, but the magnetic clamps pulled me in, which is a bit of lucky. So this is back where we are now, with Tresella and Ted Gunn back on the station. The lander is connected and they have been moved over into the lander, or the taxi. So they are now ready to come back to Kerbal, which will hopefully complete the contract, which is a major contract to get Tresella up into orbit, up onto the Mun at a particular point, take a sample, get her back to the station, and then back to the Mun. So that is on my gonna do next, is bring back the taxi, but I'm gonna try doing it with, again, minimal fuel use. Now I've got some fuel on board which I'll go through, but I'm gonna try and use some aero braking to try and bring us back with minimal amount of fuel usage as possible, just because I feel like it, partially, and also just to be economic. We've got to bring less fuel then up to these tanks up here in the future. This particular tanker is now empty. It's got some liquid, I think, on but basically it's an empty one that could be ejected, but we're using his solar panels and it needs to be replaced with another one. So it's taking a lot of my time, is all of this fuel and tankers, so I would like to reduce the amount of times, or the efficiency of the tanker service. The other thing I want to do, once I've got the taxi back, is get some probes up to the Mun to go for to look at our mapping, to get some nice resources, so that we can start on ore, looking for ore, basically. So on the next episode will be the aero braking of the taxi, and I've got a new lander planned, which has got some probes and a rover. So we're going to try and land, when I say probes, what I mean is these are basically rovers which are unmanned, which we'll just leave on the surface, driving around doing long range scans and looking for a good place to put our mining facilities, and a manned rover which will allow somebody like a scientist to rove around on a way. So if our landing's not in exactly the right spot, we can send our person out in a small rover to go and find some better spots. So that's in our next episode. So this was a bit more of a log of what I have done, rather than being as I'm doing it. Don't know if that's better or worse, actually. Just commentating over what I have done. Let me know. Next time it'll be a bit of both. A bit of commenting about the aero braking and also the new lander. So until next time, as always, leave any comments below, click that like button, and see you in game soon. And as always, have fun.